And, these guys, I got exposed to them in my last year of college in 1960, in I guess 1969. And again, because of the Kent State thing, we were, even though we were thousands of miles away, we were all sharing the same, goal, which was to end the war in Vietnam and really kind of get things back to where they should be in this country. And we're kind of in that same situation today.
You were very right there, Ernie.
Yeah, I mean, history repeats itself, and unless we learn from history, we're going to keep making the same mistakes. And there's factions of the country that want to just eliminate that ability, and it's interesting to see what happens. But these guys were in that era of controversial music, sharing the heart for ending the war, getting rid of Richard Nixon. I mean, Ronald Reagan, we used to call him Ronald Reagan, because he was the governor of California during the time that I was in college, and, all the hippies and all that stuff that was going on. And, it was a kind of crazy time. And for these guys that, like I said, I got exposed to them in college. And then, we start back again on something that we've talked about before, which is a guy named Bill Levy. Bill Levy was the creative director at Decca Records. And in 1970, we talked about this before, I had created the Jesus Christ Superstar album with Bill Levy, who was actually really in favor of the two art directors that had worked at Norman Levitt that I had replaced, and in that shootout beat out. And he really took me under his wing. We had a great relationship, and to the day he passed away. I mean, about 4 or 5 years ago. But I mean, he was an incredible mentor. And I every time you give me one of these assignments to talk about, let's talk about this album, and I'm like, all these memories come back, Joyce. I mean, it's crazy. This guy took me under his wing. He knew that I wasn't a creative director. I mean, it was a title. I mean, I felt like Donald Sutherland in the Dirty Dozen, where they tell the major that was in charge of everything that he was a general, and he was a goofus. And I mean, I was no creative director, but the agency that I worked for put me in that position because that's the position that Bill Levy wanted somebody to be in. So they were doing whatever they needed to do to keep that account, which including that shootout. So, he took me under his wing, and I never really realized it, Joyce, until we talked about a few of these works that we had done together. And we've talked about those packages. And I realized what an incredible mentor he really was. He was giving me crazy assignments that he could have probably done. There were other people that he was using like myself. Okay, I wasn't the only one. And so, we had a great friendship. It was really incredible. And I think that's one of the things that I really tried to carry over into Pacific Pioneer. And Tony and I, my partner in Pacific Pioneer, shared that same feeling of wanting to have a relationship beyond just business. If there was a person that was a good person and liked us, I mean, why not include them in your friends, thing. So we were very much into that. And I realized, especially on this album really got me thinking, because what he would do is he would throw me these packages that had very little stuff to work with, so it was like creative directors are interesting. They get credit for a lot of covers that all they did was chose the person that would do it. And, in a good sized record company, like a Capitol or RCA, one of those companies, you get, maybe as a creative director, you get between 20 and 30 albums a month to dole out. And there's no way that anybody could do that many. So they have an army of illustrators, designers, lettering people that do that stuff for them. And then they get the creative director credit. And, but Bill wasn't like that. And, this album was one of the only albums that had my name on it. Bill was very much into giving me credit. He's the photographer for this album, like he was on some of the other albums we talked about. But even when he wasn't, he gave me design credit. He was the creative director, but he gave me, and I never put my name on any album covers that I did. So there's, 250 albums out there, and only Jesus Christ Superstar has my name on the cover of the libretto, where I have that illustration of all the characters with the
I
three
saw
crosses.
it. I
Yeah, and if you look real close, my Cefalu letter is down there, but very rarely. And Bill was into that, and he was making me. If I was going to be a successful creative director, I had to be ready for whatever came my way. And it wasn't sometimes just as easy as, well, you take these three and you take those four, and I just sit back and thumbs up or down like Caesar, right?
Yeah.
And so, he gave me assignments that he could have done or could have had somebody else do, but it would have been critical for my education, because it wasn't always going to be easy. It was going to be use your head sometimes. It's going to be more than just give you a photograph and you put a name at the top, of the group and the album name, and that's it. It has to be more than that. So in this cover was really got me started thinking about everything that we were talking about, Joyce. And God bless you. You're just amazing. I mean, you don't know the effect that you have on me and what I do and what I've done. And I mean, you bring up such interesting things that make me think again, about this kind of stuff. Because I'm one that never really looked back. I always stayed focused on what was in front of me and what was in front of that, never really paying attention to what went by until the internet came along. Once the internet came along, then it was really all about, music, obviously. And a lot of people don't know about the corporate work, but it's not as recognizable and as acceptable. I mean, who's into craft foods or, other than to eat stuff? You're not into the marketing or the contenting of pizza boxes. Nobody cares about that. But, musicians, that's a whole nother category, because people that eat still listen to music, so
That's
true. Yeah. So it was a great way for me to do that. And this cover, Bill took the photography. He took the front. He had three. He wanted to get the idea of a studio, a live, studio production, because that's what this album was. These three guys went into the studio. Electric Lady, yeah, which was Jimi Hendrix studio, and Electric Ladyland, I think that was the name of it. And they spent time recording. This was their first album. They had gigged around in, like I said, some of the clubs in Ohio, and then they got it to open for a lot of those bigger bands that we talked about earlier. But this was their first album. This was the one that they really, and so Bill wanted to convey that in the photography. So he was able to shoot, he wasn't able to shoot each one of them together in a group, in a studio, like they were performing and putting together the album. But he did take this shot that you see on the back cover, which is the three of them. And I'm thinking, okay, well, he gives me the photography. So I'm sending over, there's a group called Glass Harp. I said, oh, yeah, I know of them from college. And he said, yeah, well, they just signed to Decca Records. And they're doing, we're releasing their first album. I want you to do it. I'm cool. So he sent me the photography. And I take it out, and they're little, transparencies, 2 1/4 transparencies. And there's the three individual shots, and then there's this group of the three of them. And then he said, well, so I'm figuring, okay, it's going to be the shot of the three of them on the front. We're going to do some lettering and pick the typeface and put their name up there, because there wasn't a lot of hand lettering being done yet. It was typefaces that you had to pick from, and maybe you did a little something. And phototype was just kind of in its infancy. So that was really, later on in the later 70s. But so I'm looking at the photography, and then he calls me and he goes, and he tells me that he wants this to be kind of like an in-studio kind of thing. So I got to use those three shots. And it's like, okay, there's three shots. They're individual guys kind of in their own different setting. I mean, what do you do? So what I did was, I went down to the I was in Manhattan. There was a hobby store it was not far away. And I went there and I bought clear plexiglass rods. Okay. So that they look like harp strings. And that's what you see on that front cover shot there. There's the three pictures of them. but and I made a print. I had a print made of the three of them in the position you're seeing them, and then I went to the photographer and we set up the plexiglass rods so that they would look like harp strings. And then you would look through them and you got to get a little bit of a distortion. You don't notice that so quickly that it's three individuals, in different environments. It's just you look at it through these glass rods, which, looks like a harp string.
It looked just like a harp. I thought that's what it was.
Yeah, no, it was.
Ooh, you are something, Ernie.
Well, you gotta, and again, I think Bill Levy gave me that on purpose just to see, because he got so many other albums that he could have given me. He could have really given me other albums to do, but this one was more of a challenge. He gave it to me, and then he told me what he wanted. I wanted to look like they're in the studio, and I couldn't get the three of them together, but I did get them afterwards in another shoot where we did the back cover shot. And, that's not he said, it's not really an exciting, captivating cover shot. So let's do something like what he said about the live studio thing. And so I'm looking at these things and I'm going, well, it's just odd to break something up in thirds, piece symbol, the era, but no, it needed to be something more than that. And these three pictures were really different. I mean, they were different from each other. The lighting was different. The way the environment they're in is different. So what can you do to bring that together to make it look like it's conveying a particular feeling? And so when I had gone, and the photographer that did that shoot was different than Bill Levy. He just gave me he did the first shoot, and one of the other things about it was that, again, he gave it to me because it was the difficult thing to do. And he wanted to see how I could do it, and I had already, we did about 5 or 6 albums together while I was at Norman Levitt. And then like I had mentioned before, because I got hired at Craig Braun, they thought that, because they're mainly dealing with record company people. They didn't deal with the groups. And so for them to be able to get to Bill Levy was a real plus. And I'm sure that's the part of the reason. It wasn't the main reason, because Jesus Christ Superstar became the tiebreaker. Once he saw that and what they had presented, I was in. Now he just needed to educate me and teach me how to be, because I was very upfront with him. I went to college in Oakland. We were hippies, and he was an older gentleman and very sophisticated. Bill Levy was very sophisticated. He lived in Sutton Place. The guy had done some big things, a lot of big photography, because he had the access. He was the creative director, so he could go backstage. He could do whatever he wanted. So that's, when he did those individual studio shots at Electric Ladyland, again, I think they were all done in the same day, but there was no way to put the three of them together the way he needed it to do. And so he did it that way in 3 separate shots. So, like I said, when I showed him what we had done, he was just he was beside himself. He gave me a couple more projects that same day when I showed him this. He just really wanted me to learn. I guess, like other mentors that I've had in my life, he was one of those people that just saw the talent, even saw it more than I saw it, and like I said, took me under his wing and really, I just noticed that it was, I think I said JD's was the happening place in Kent, near the college, and it was JB's. I just saw a note that I did here. It was JB's, and they became a local, phenomenon in the area. They became very, very popular, and that club was part of the big reason. And then, of course, Kent State, and then the whole movement that was going on. So it was a very interesting band. I had the ability to talk with the three of them.
I was going to ask you that. Did you get a chance to really speak with them?
I did. Phil and John Steve, and it was the day that Bill shot those 3 shots of them. And that's, he got me on the phone with him. He had told him about the Jesus Christ Superstar album that I had done, and and the work that we were doing together. And he thought that I would be the perfect person for them to do, to do this album. And they were the religious rock was a big thing that was happening around this
Yes.
time, and they had that roots in that. I mean, a couple of them did, and so the Jesus Christ Superstar album, even though I hadn't done a lot of albums, I mean, that was probably the first real album, that I had ever done, aside from the one for Dolls Alive with International Paper Company. So that one, but that was a big one. That one was like everybody knew that album, and everybody knew the controversy, and it was going along with all the other rebellious things that were happening at the time. Like we talked about the war in Vietnam, just society itself, and everything else, Dick Nixon and Ronald Reagan and all that crazy, and then you got on top of that, you got the LSD and the acid tests and stuff going on on the West Coast at the Fillmore and the Avalon. I mean, there were times that I remember going there to see, it was Grand Funk Railroad and what was the name of that band? Not PG&E. So, anyway, it was another band, and they had it was all the acid tests, and they had you pay, you get your ticket, you go in, and before you get into the main ballroom, there's a coffee table with all these C&H sugar cubes. And you take one and go inside, and Timothy Leary was there. I mean, it was crazy, man. It was crazy. They're playing Batman old serials from the 40s upside down and on the ceiling. I mean, it was liquid light shows, The Family Dog. I mean, it was a crazy time. And, these guys were just in the right spot at the right time. And, they did this album, did well. I mean, they went on to do other albums as well, but, this one was their first one, and it was great. For me, it was a great learning experience, and being able to think on your feet. I mean, I think that was, again, I think that was probably the most important thing that Bill Levy wanted me to learn was, it's not always going to be a big band. It's not always going to be easy, and because a lot of the ones that we've talked about, he threw me like that. They were ones that he could have easily done or given to somebody else, but he wanted to teach me. And again, with us talking about these albums, I mean, I haven't talked about this album in probably 20 years.
And I never really knew about the group, and I learned a lot from you. And that album is still available. It is wonderful. And then I learned about Phil Kagi, who is part of the group, and I believe they are all still together. They've got a Facebook page, and Phil is very active with them. And I know in the Christian music circles, Phil is a name.
Right. Yeah. And it was indicative of the time too, because religion was a big part of everything that was going on. Even the Catholic Church banning Jesus Christ Superstar and the Hare Krishnas bouncing and playing music outside of every airport, giving away free incense and stuff. Music was a big part of that whole era, and I guess I guess anybody could say that, the people in the 40s with big band, when big band came along, and jazz, and then of course the early rock and roll, devil's music. I mean, it was crazy times. And then people like Pat Boone became, very successful because they were white guys that could sing black music, and the parents wouldn't get crazy. So
Fats Domino even thanked them and said, because of Pat doing, my music, it was enriching me as well too. And then we came to learn, that Pat was a great singer, but Fats Domino, ain't that a shame? Has to be Fats Domino.
I saw. We weren't able to get into the concert. He played San Jose. He played at the auditorium there, and I remember we couldn't get in. It was sold out, packed. We couldn't get tickets. We were late getting there. And it was during the day, actually. It was a day concert inside. And I remember my friend and I walked around the back, and we saw the limousine that he had pulled up in. It was in the parking thing behind the backstage doors where you go. We somehow got back there. I don't remember, but it was his limousine. So I didn't see Fats Domino, but I saw the limousine that he drove in. So
he's amazing. I was blessed
yeah.
to see him in Baltimore in the early '80s, and he put on this New Orleans style show, and everybody was having a good time.
Yeah, sure.
Antoine Fats Domino, we're gonna miss him there. We miss him
and
very much.
He was one of the early guys. I mean, when you look at it, and it's funny because all that early music, when you think about the evolution from them to the hippie movement and rock and roll, the groups there, the psychedelic thing, all those bands, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, all those influential bands started in the United States playing black music.
Yeah.
They were doing covers, of Little Richard and Chuck Berry and, all these, and there's so much respect, certainly, Keith Richards and Chuck Berry and all these different, black musicians who they played with. And Mick Jagger, I remember reading an interview that he talked about how influenced he was in England from all the, the black music that was being played in the United States. And so the timing was just perfect. And that was, again, and when you think about it, the Beatles, their early songs were all cover songs pretty much of hits that had happened here.
You are so right. And thank you for mentioning how Ohio was a burgeoning music scene, especially in the late 60s. Neil Bogart used to be with Cameo Parkway, and he actually was one of the people that recognized what was coming out of Ohio.
Well, you had
Bob
the James
Seger,
Gang. The James Gang was another, and one of the people that they were interested in recruiting into Glass Harp was Joe Walsh.
I heard that.
Yeah, they were really looking at Joe Walsh, and then he went on obviously to join the Eagles and other bands before the Eagles. But there was a lot of music coming out of Ohio, a lot of music, and I remember that. I remember. That was because I was so plugged into music in the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, that, most of my schoolmates lived in communes, and we used to spend a lot of time there on the weekends, living in communes and being, part-time hippies. I was also in the Army. I was in the reserve, so I couldn't have long hair. So everybody thought I was a narc, it was kind of crazy.
Oh, that is funny, Ernie.
Yeah, it's true because, I wanted to be a hippie. But I couldn't, they wouldn't let you. And you had a meeting you went from once a week to 1 weekend a month. So you had, and my beard grows slow. So I had like 3 weeks to grow something, be seen in it, and then shave it for the meeting. And it just became too much trouble, But it was an interesting time for me because I was in this art school with all these people that were so into everything. And then I go back to San Jose, and it was like being back in high school and hanging with my old friends and, doing this Army Reserve thing was really kind of crazy time, for me too. But I really, again, it's covers like this that really, and again, it wasn't a big, I would think most people today, probably from their 30s and 40s, to the teens wouldn't even know who Glass Harp was, but they made an amazing mark, and they, like you said, they're still around today. They're still playing and doing stuff, and that says a lot.
It sure does. And I was reading something too, Ernie, the group, the Human Beings, they were from out of Ohio. And Steve went on to become part of the Human Beings, Steve Marculin.
Right. I had heard that name before. I didn't know that, but yeah, it's so funny. It's like, I always think about like Flo and Eddie because we were so close for 4 or 5 years. We were in the same office. They rented a space from us, and they were just incredible. They were always doing stuff and they were the background singers for Bruce Springsteen's Born in America. All those songs, they did a lot of the background vocals on. And so it goes back to that respect. The respect that musicians have, respect that artists have. I have a lot of respect for guys like Drew Struzan, and there are a lot of others, Bill Garland, not only the guys that work for me, but guys like Peter Palumbi, and other illustrators that we, have done competitive stuff. And Bob Rodriguez is another one. He did the $5 shoes beautiful, beautiful work. And he's a very famous illustrator now, Joe Patagno, and even the stuff that Joe did outside of all the Motorhead stuff that had nothing to do with Pacific Pioneer. I feel like I was part of that whole nurturing scene coming up, just like, the musicians that we've talked about being in that era of time in '68 when things were really changing and rapidly. I was able to be in that same place in what I love to do from the late '60s on up to today. I still am doing a lot of work. We're going to be talking about something I'm going to be doing at the first of the year, which is this online gallery where we're going to sell original pieces, sketches, comps, all kinds of stuff, photography. I've got over 3,000 photographs.
That is great. Oh,
Yeah,
that
and
is
it gives
just
people a
great.
chance to own a piece of that and not spend a fortune. So, if they have anywhere between $250 to 150,000, I got something for you. So it's like, okay, well, it's '78. I don't have any kids, and why shouldn't Bonnie and I just really enjoy it and get it out there? I've had it for 53 years. Get it out there and let other people enjoy it as well. So
Well,
it's all
thank you
good.
for sharing it, just the way you share, on Ernie's Corner. And as I told you, I'm still, learning. And this is the one thing that I value so much about Ernie's Corner and the feedback that I get, that a lot of our friends on the block are also learning. When it comes to songs,
Oh,
I have to
oh,
listen, but I like your
oh.
choices that you pick.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of good songs on this album, and they've done a lot of good songs beyond just this album. But if I had to, I I went back and listened to some of this stuff because like you said,
Good.
it's out there. And whenever we get these kind of projects, Bill Levy would always have a rough tape or he'd have a pressing,
Mm,
and he would give them to us. And that's how I learned to, listen to the music, get involved with the music. Don't worry about, well, here's what the group looks like. And you have this idea. Listen to the music and take what they're trying to say in the music and bring it over into what you do for them. He taught me that. He really taught me that. And it works in corporate America too. But to the songs in this album, Look in the Sky would be
okay.
one that I really like. Garden, and then Whatever Life Demands. But if I had to pick between those three, A Look in the Sky would be the one that I would pick.